Spending to cope with the COVID pandemic has placed a huge burden on the public finances, and that's a burden that's going to have to be paid back somehow. Now, at the latest economic policy panel session, Gabriel Zucman has proposed a way that multinational companies can share that burden through taxation. Hello, Gabriel. Welcome.
Hello, Tim.
Now, you've published quite a lot of research in the past few years about how multinationals are avoiding tax by shifting it to tax havens. For people who haven't been following that story, what sort of sums are we talking about?
We're talking about pretty large sums. So according to the estimates that I produced with my colleagues, Thomas Torsloff and Ludwig Wehr, close to 40% of multinational profits are shifted to tax havens each year. So multinational profits, these are the profits made by corporations outside of the country of their headquarters. So think about the profits made by Apple outside of the US or BMW outside of Germany. And so what we found is that at the global level, close to 40% of this annual flow of profits ends up in countries like Bermuda, Ireland, the Cayman Islands, other tax havens where these profits are taxed at a very low effective rate of about 5%. And the one thing I would add is that it looks like US multinationals are particularly aggressive when it comes to shifting profits to tax havens, because for them it's not 40%, but it's closer to 60% of their profits that they shift to tax havens each year. And the second thing I would add is that the revenue losses for governments globally are very significant. We're talking about something in between 100 and 200 billion dollars in corporate income tax revenues that are lost because of this shifting of profits.
So in this paper, you're talking about, filling some of those holes that are left by having a COVID burden-sharing tax proposal, aren't you? What exactly are we talking about here? How would it work?
Look, there are two ways to tax corporations. You can have an income tax, and that's what we have, a corporate income tax. And it has all the problems that I described. It's routinely avoided, and there are ambitious efforts to try to address those problems and fix the corporate income tax. And that's very important. And in this paper, with my co-author, Emmanuel says, we're not talking about that. We're talking about another instrument that could be used to tax companies that we don't use today, but that we could use. And the idea is to have a tax on the market value of the stock issued by listed company, a tax on the capitalization of big listed companies. And more concretely, what we propose is that G20 countries could levy, all of them could levy a tax of 0.2% on the value of the stock of listed companies headquartered in the G20. And because the G20 stock market capitalization is around $90 trillion today, this tax alone, although it's at a very low rate of 0.2%, would raise approximately $180 billion each year in revenue. So that's a lot of money. It would more than offset the losses that exist because of this profit shifting to tax havens that we were discussing. And the second thing that's important to mention is that because stock ownership is highly concentrated among the rich, even when you factor in the fact that stocks are sometimes held through broad-based pension funds, but even taking that into account, stock ownership is highly concentrated, which means that when you tax companies with a tax on on the market value of their equities, for instance, this is a de facto progressive tax, and so it would contribute to making the tax system more progressive.
Who's going to pay this? Is it going to be every listed company, regardless of where they pay their tax?
Yeah, so the proposal that we make is for every listed company to pay this tax of 0.2%. And the way it would work is, one way it could work is that the Securities Commission in each country could be in charge of collecting this tax. So, that you have regulators, of the financial industry, of the stock market, like the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US, and you have similar bodies in other countries which regulate publicly traded securities. And in fact, they already charge fees for the issuance of stocks and for certain stock transactions, which are kind of like tiny taxes. And so it would be very easy for them to just add one extra fee, a tax of 0.2% of the value of the stock. And if all G20 countries do this, you are taxing almost all the world's listed companies, because more than 90% of them are headquartered in G20 countries.
I can imagine what they might say to this if this proposal turned up now, which is, why are you taxing us now? Wouldn't you rather we invested this in the recovery? What would you say to that?
I would say two things, or even three. I would say first, look, it's a tiny tax, 0.2%, and it's very easy to pay. Even if you don't have liquidity, you can always issue stock, to pay for the tax. And so it's really, it's not a big burden. But I will also say, more importantly, that this proposal, in my view, is particularly adapted to the post-COVID world. Why? Because the pandemic has reinforced a key trend of the pre-coronavirus economy, which is the rise of business concentration. So, typically while brick and mortar stores were closed during lockdowns, Amazon sales rose, cloud computing exploded, Facebook traffic soared, and so giant businesses have emerged as the main winners from the pandemic. And they're not paying a lot in taxes. And so it makes a lot of sense to say, look, those businesses who, not all of them, but overall have benefited quite a lot from the pandemic, it makes sense for them to contribute to sharing the burden of this crisis. And the third thing, and perhaps the most important one, is that this tax on the capitalization of listed corporations would also contribute to addressing broader trends that predate the pandemic. And what are these trends? Basically, that large multinational companies have been the main winners from globalization since the 1980s, or from the form of globalization that we've known since the 1980s, characterized by tax competition, very little or in fact no harmonization. And so they've benefited a lot from this, and instead of paying more and more in taxes, they've been paying less and less. And so we are in this situation which I think is not sustainable. So to put it simply, if globalization means ever lower taxes for its main winners, multinational companies and their shareholders, and at the same time higher and higher taxes for those who do not benefit a lot from globalization, like retirees, small businesses, low-wage workers, or in fact sometimes suffer from it, then everybody understands that this process is not sustainable, neither politically nor economically. And so there is an urgent need to fix this injustice, which undermines the support for our modern and global economy. There is an urgent need basically to say, look, we need to find ways to reconcile globalization on the one hand and tax justice, tax progressivity on the other hand, And there are several ways to do that, but the proposal that we formulate in that paper is one new way, practical and symbolic, and also more than symbolic. It would really make these winners from globalization effectively pay more in taxes.
I mean, one of the reasons why these organizations have paid less and less tax over the years is they've got super talented people who arrange their profit, where their profits go, into ways that stop them paying tax. Is there any way that you see that they might react to this to, just avoid the tax?
That's a great question. And look, one beauty of this proposal that we are formulating is that it would be very hard to avoid this new tax, for the very simple reason that you cannot hide your market capitalization. It is what it is. Every second it changes, but it's there. Amazon is worth more than $1 trillion, and there's nothing they can do about it. Corporations have become really good at manipulating their income, and more precisely, the location of their income. Say, oh, look, we've made billions of dollars in Bermuda. So, for instance, in 2019, Google Alphabet said, oh, we've made almost $20 billion in revenue in Bermuda. Nothing takes place, and they're getting away with this, but this could change. But they could not say, oh, look, our stock value, our stock price, our market capitalization is very low. No, it is not. It's perfectly observable. And so it would be really hard to avoid such a tax.
You and Emmanuel have been publishing about this, and with other co-authors for quite some time, talking about the way in which multinational organizations avoid tax, and you're advocating tax reform. The various organizations, the OECD is one, have picked up on this with proposals, but let's be honest, that's really gone nowhere. Do you think this has a better chance of succeeding?
I do think that actually we are at the very beginning of a new phase where real progress might be achieved. And I'm optimistic for several reasons. One is that when you look at opinion polls and when you ask people in Britain, in the US, in France, all over the world, do you think that multinational companies pay enough in taxes? The vast majority. And it's true even of Republican voters in the US, the vast majority of the electorate says, no, we don't think so. So that's number one. Number two, there is a growing political will to address the problem. For many years, policymakers, again, all over the world, thought and said that tax competition, tax avoidance was kind of a law of nature. Look, with globalization, profits are going to move to low tax countries, and our corporations are going to move their headquarters, their factories, and there's nothing we can do about that. This view is wrong. It has always been wrong, but now I think there is a better understanding at a political level that this view is wrong. And you see that, for instance, in the recent proposals made by the US administration to push for a global agreement on a minimum corporate income tax, where for the first time you have a Treasury Secretary in the US that says, look, tax competition is not a law of nature. We can change the rules of the game, and we are going to change the rules. Globalization so far has been characterized by no harmonization, no full unfettered tax competition, but that's a choice, and we can make other choices. We can choose coordination instead of competition. We can choose to tax profits. We can choose to tax wealth if we want. And it's the first time that you have such a clear message at the highest level, and in the US, at the highest political level, but you hear that also in a growing number of countries. It's striking that Britain, for instance, is on a path now towards increasing its corporate income tax rate. And it seems to me that we are at a turning point. Over the last decades, there's been a race to the bottom with corporate taxation, with corporate income tax rates that declined from 49% on average in 1985. So remember, think about that. In 1985, the average corporate income tax rate globally was 49%. Today, it's around 20%. And I think, a few years ago, most experts thought that this trend was bound to continue, that never, we would converge to zero, basically, or to very low rates. And they were wrong. And I think that now we are at the beginning of a race to the top, an increase gradually. And I don't know how far it's going to go, but we are at the beginning of a new phase where there's going to be increased taxation of corporate profits and perhaps of corporate wealth as well.
For this idea in particular, you've positioned it as a COVID burden sharing tax proposal. Now, if that's going to happen, then it would have to be put into place in months or a year or two, rather than in a decade waiting for people's opinions to catch up. Is this a thought experiment, or are you making a serious policy proposal here?
It's a serious policy proposal. It's serious because it's practical. It's something where, if there's a political will, you could have a G20 summit later this year. It could be in June or in September, where, governments, heads of states of the G20 say, look, we are going to do this. 0.2% tax on the value of listed equities. You can see how they might reach an agreement like that. It's not, implausible. And so politically, this is feasible because there is this demand for more tax progressivity and for better taxing the main winners from globalization. So I think this is politically feasible. Practically, this can be done. I already mentioned the way that this could immediately be implemented. You ask Securities and Exchange Commissions in each country to levy this new tax. They are already levying taxes on stock issuance and stock transactions, and so just they know how to do that. And the tax is very hard to avoid, as we discussed, and so it can immediately generate quite a lot of revenue. So I think it's doable. Look, I'm not saying this is necessarily going to happen. Maybe there's going to be more focus on fixing the corporate income tax as opposed to creating a new tax on corporate wealth. But I think there is. It would be good to have both instruments. I think, ideally, you want to have a tax on income and a tax on wealth. And why is this so? Well, it's because you have a number of companies that can and that have already become enormously valuable in terms of having a very high stock market capitalization, even before making a lot of profit. So think about Amazon, for instance, or more recently, think about Tesla. Amazon until 2018 or 2019 didn't, record any profit because they were just, trying to establish market power, low prices to create, a dominant position in a number of markets. Their stock market capitalization was already extremely high, but no profit means no tax on income. Tesla is in the same situation today. It's not recording a profit, but it has a lot of wealth. And so in that context, you want to tax wealth and not only income. And it's the same logic that applies to individuals. What is true for corporations is also true for individuals. You have individuals who have a lot of taxable income, and for them the income tax is the proper way to tax them. And you also have individuals who have little taxable income and a lot of wealth. Think about Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg. They are all shareholders of big listed companies that do not distribute dividends, and so their taxable income is very low. And that's why for them you want a wealth tax. That's a proper way to tax these billionaires. So just to summarize, for individuals, you have two dimensions of heterogeneity. Some, have a lot among the rich. Some have very high income and relatively low wealth. Others have relatively low taxable income and a lot of wealth. So you want two instruments, an income tax and a wealth tax. And the very same logic applies to corporations. So that's why we're making this proposal to introduce a wealth tax on corporations.
Well, as you say, Gabriel, it is on the policy agenda now. So let's see what happens in the next few months. That this is being seriously discussed, but it's a very interesting proposal. I'm sure there'll be a lot more discussion about this one in particular. Thanks very much, Gabriel.
Thank you.
If you want to know more about Gabriel's proposal, then the paper's called A Wealth Tax on Corporations Stock, and the authors are Gabriel Zucman and Emmanuel Saez. And you can also catch up with Gabriel's presentation to the Economic Policy Panel. The link's on the screen now.